Okay, good afternoon. This is the Urbana Arts and Culture Commission meeting conducted 100% virtually due to the Governor's Shelter-in-Place Order and Executive Order Number 5, the provisions of the Open Meetings Act 5, ILCS 120. In addition, Section 4 of the City of Urbana Temporary Emergency Ordinance to address the COVID-19 pandemic provides for meetings to be conducted electronically. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the city's website. Please note the chat function for this session has been disabled and all public will be muted. Public input can be provided during the public input part of the agenda. If you wish to speak during it, please use the button at the bottom right corner of your screen titled Raise Hand to be called upon. This function is located in the participant window. State your first and last name for the record. If you are phoning in and would like to speak, please use *9 to raise your hand. For each agenda item, after staff have presented or offered an update, Arts and Culture Commission members will have an opportunity to ask questions by raising hand to be called upon. Again, this function is located in the participant window in the bottom right corner of your screen. Okay. I'm calling the meeting. This is the May 26th meeting of the Urbana Arts and Culture Commission. Can we have roll call?
All right. Bex. Ms. Bex.
I am here.
Okay. Ms. Headland.
Present.
Mr. Miller.
Present.
Mr. Modica. Ms. Orchardson.
Present.
Mr. Pinilla.
Here.
Ms. Salmon.
Here.
And Ms. Williams has been excused.
Okay, we have quorum. Next up is approval of minutes of the April 14th, 2020 meeting. Any corrections or comments? Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll move the approval of the minutes.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Okay, I don't believe we have any additions to the agenda, and I don't believe we have anybody from the public who wishes to address the commission. Is that right? So, Rachel, we're going to start with your staff report.
Excellent. I'm going to share screen here just real quick. All right, you should be able to see my screen now. Maybe the wrong one. Hold on. Let me stop share for a second. Are you able? Hold on. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
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 Excellent. Okay. All right, so this is your May report. I will note that there are some things I'm going to be adding to the original report because we had this meeting rescheduled from May 12th, and in that time we already had some changes, and on May 12th the report had been put together days prior to that. So there's been a number of things that have happened in just a couple of short weeks, so I'll make sure to note those things as we go through. But let's just get us started. So this is the May report for the Arts and Culture Commission staff. I want to begin by saying that just to kind of make sure that everyone has an awareness of the impact of COVID-19 on the continuation of our programs, I want to reiterate that we, as soon as the mid-March shelter-in-place order went into place, we have been largely suspending many of our events and having to revision many of our events. We really are in that phase of kind of revisioning and trying to move forward on most all of our initiatives in one way or another. And so that has been, just a project of creativity, truly. And I wanted to make sure that that's been made clear to the commission. And we'll go through each program one by one in this report that's mentioned and talk about some of the ways that we either are facing cancellations or revisioning into virtual events or alternative forms of events, or in other words, really readapting the events for the current climate. I want to also indicate that the staff are continuing to largely work from home, and when I say largely, I do want to acknowledge that that is with some infrequent visits and also to the office that are all done in collaboration with our staff. And of course, many of you may be aware that our farmers market is back up and running. Our program specialist, Heather Ann, who's on this call, works for both the Arts and Culture program and the Urbana Farmers Market. So Market in the Square staff are at the Square staff are also working on occasion in-house in the office. We are, as a city, going to be looking at increased return to the office, but that is going to be slow and deliberate. So that may involve two folks who are able to work from home, continuing to work from home to reduce the number of staff that are at the city building. But for the present moment, we continue to be here. I want to mention that essential services, of course, are still in operation, but for us, we also are in the process of hiring because the Summer Youth Employment Grant was received by our program from the Illinois Arts Council in the amount of $3,150. That is going to fund 2 high school students. Those students are going to be working remotely from home, and we're going to work with them to accommodate whatever they need in order to do that. One of the things that this grant funds is 2 particularly high schoolers. So we're in the process of getting this hiring underway, and you'll see this announcement in circulation here, and it would be wonderful to see it shared. We're going to be working directly in outreach with many of the teachers and have already started that process of getting this word out to their students. But really excited to have that finally underway. We had some things that needed to be accomplished on our side in terms of approvals, especially given that in other respects, the city's in a hiring freeze right now. This, of course, is different because this is grant monies and not part of the city budget, but certainly very excited to have 2 new students come in, and they'll be introduced at the next monthly meeting. I also want to mention that we continue to work with the Community Learning Lab in order to have a small group of University of Illinois students work with us. The student group that completed the project that they had been working on from this past semester are all wrapped up, but we are likely to be assigned another small group of students that are going to be able to support the program in a number of ways, including helping adapt to virtual events, getting the word out, sharing relief information with artists. Let's turn our attention now to Urbana Arts Grants and some of the current projects that we have going on. As you know, we gave out $88,000 to artists and arts organizations and festival presenters this year. That was a total of 38 creative projects. Nearly all grantees, save only a couple that are University of Illinois departments that tend to have many more issues with getting contracts signed, and they have a lot more bureaucratic hoops to jump through. Save only about 3, 2 of which are particularly fall into that category. Everyone else has been fully processed in terms of getting their contracts signed, and many of whom have already received their first grant payment. So that is all wonderful and underway. And I want to just again shout out to Heather Ann for helping with getting all of those things processed. We've been working a lot with grantees, and I will take a moment at the end of this report to really solicit feedback from our arts and culture commissioners on Tier 3 in particular, because we, of course, are looking forward into what is possible in this current climate and making sure that we both uphold the intention of these grants and also do what we can to accommodate the arts organizations that have received these monies, many of whom help drive forward our art scene at a time where it is vulnerable. So we'll be talking about that a little bit later in the report. But all in all, things are moving forward. We've been working with a number of grantees to accommodate questions and make sure that we're also assisting with brainstorming how to adapt programs, even beyond questions of being virtual, but also just all the different things that may be needed in order to assess how best to move forward. So that's been a real ongoing process too with all of our grantees. I want to mention a few of the initiatives that have really taken off in great ways. One is Art in the Time of Quarantine, which is a youth arts exhibit showcasing student artwork from across Champaign County. We are working collaboratively with Chambana Moms, Cranert Art Museum, Coop Adventure Play, and the Museum of the Grand Prairie to organize this exhibition. It's been a digital exhibition. At this point, it is completely wrapped up. So we received quite a number of artworks from students, and we were able to compile them. And now we're working with UPTV, so shout out to Jason over there for getting this on UPTV. We have kind of a slideshow of all the submissions with the ages and first names of the students who submitted, and really just tremendous artwork, really across age level that showcase a lot of what our students are processing during this time of isolation, and how they're really thinking about the impact of not just quarantine, but of the virus, but also of just, you know, what's going on for them on a daily basis. And it's been really interesting to see what they submit. We're also excited to say that this will also be part of an archive at Museum of the Grand Prairie. The anticipation, of course, being that at one point in the future, the Museum of the Grand Prairie will likely be doing an exhibition on this time of quarantine, of COVID-19, and actually refer and include all of the artworks that were submitted as part of the student showcase, to include youth voices in that as well. I want to mention a few other interesting virtual events. As you know, we did a Hearts for Healthcare on National Doctor Day at the tail end of March, and that was really wonderful. Here's some photos for that. We've gotten a lot of news coverage of these different virtual initiatives, and here lots of members of the communities decorated their houses and then sent in images of what they were able to do in recognition of healthcare and other essential workers. We also had an initiative called Talk Your Walk, and this was, again, an ongoing initiative for a while. It's petered off a little bit in terms of participation, but it was an every Friday event to kind of chalk around your neighborhood so that people who are walking on walks, as that is one of the primary ways that I think people are getting out and about, that they can find lots of art in their neighborhood. So you can see some examples of this one I love, particularly on the left, that has an aerial view taken with a drone camera of a family and their whole driveway. But lots of things around the neighborhood that showcase both artistic talent, of course, but also lots of messages of support. I love this one too. Oh, and then the scream, which is just amazing. So lots of really strong creativity there. We also had our April Haiku from Home. This was in honor of National Poetry Month, and lots of people submitted pieces that they'd written. There was a concurrent poetry initiative that ended up being promoted alongside of that, and that was organized by Urbana High School students called Pop-Up Poetry. And so this is an example of a pop-up poem that was posted in both places too. And another, so people putting poetry out in the community where people can find it. Great celebration of poetry in Urbana. And I just want to acknowledge that these are the kinds of things that are, you know, really in some ways becoming what we're able to do during this time, that still kind of continues to further that community engagement piece, offer people creative outlets, and celebrate the things that we always want to celebrate, you know, National Poetry Month being one of them. We've also been working with the Urbana Free Library every Monday to do a Monday Artist Inspiration, which is a social media post that have actually been getting quite a good amount of traffic on the library's page, especially highlighting different local artists. So it shares a piece of their work and then talks about that piece, but also shares links. And then the artists have been we've evolved it to include a picture of the artist and a kind of quote or advice from the artist. So that's something that's happening every Monday, and you can find those on our social media pages. And I also want to mention a lot of the projects of the Poet Laureate have continued. He's had to cancel, of course, a number of in-person appearances, but these are the initiatives that he's been able to do. So Poets on a Park Bench, in your report, it mentions that we are looking to convert it to video interviewing. That is underway. So since I wrote this report, we have made taken a lot of steps in getting this organized. We're going to be working with a local videographer to actually turn this into a Poets in a Pandemic TV series. And it's similar to the park bench structure, be in part an interview and in part a sharing of individual local poets' work. So that will also be premiering pretty soon. We'll be handing that off to UPTV to be able to put that up on their channel and on YouTube, of course. The Postcard Poetry Project is has had a bit of a pause just to give way attention to some other things, but we fully intend to circle back to this too, and be able to offer opportunities for people to submit. Now you'll see even in the Haiku from Home, a lot of people submitted postcard versions, so those folks will be encouraged to also put it in this archive, but we'll be turning this into a digital archive. It was originally going to be an exhibition in collaboration with Common Ground, so we've been in touch with Common Ground about participating in the digital archive as well. Common Ground's actually suspended a lot of all of their exhibits for the present moment, and all of their programs. And actually the person in charge of their programming is currently on sort of a leave because of that. And so we're going to be working with her when she comes back to work and creating some sort of digital version of the Postcard Poetry Project. Poems on Glass continues as well. Still working on getting this piece up and going, but very excited. And of course, we'll have more information soon. And most of all, Will Rieger's been really writing a lot of poetry about Urbana. So he's had a big initiative to write poems about Urbana, but then also to write the community poems. So anybody who reaches out to him is able to request a poem. And he has had a really strong response to this. So he's been writing quite a lot for our residents, anyone who asks him. We've been posting this wherever we can. We encourage you to share it as well. He has not gotten tired of this. He says he doesn't have enough, so he'd like to continue to write. And I encourage you to share it with anybody who may be interested. Another thing that's changed since our last meeting is that Young Artist Studio has been converted into a virtual version. So we now have virtual Young Artist Studio art classes being offered once a month, just as we had offered Young Artist Studio in the past, in collaboration with the Urbana Free Library. What that has meant is that the library actually handles registration, and they also handle the Zoom setup for that. But otherwise, we work with all the artists, and we've been working with everybody we had already scheduled. We had scheduled out till December. So we've been working with everyone to convert those into virtual presentations. Our most recent one was 2 Sundays ago, and it was with Thomas Nickel, one of the founders of Pens to Lens. And he taught kids filmmaking, particularly how to make their own stop motion films. That went really, really well. We had nice attendance. I think about 13 families logged in. It, of course, isn't the same as when we have it at the library, but we think that we'll have more participation as the time goes on. But it was really engaging, and he did a wonderful job. So I'm really excited about moving that forward. Next up, we wanted to talk a bit about the Downtown Get Down. When I wrote this report, I mentioned that we were in the process of kind of awaiting special event information, particularly related to cancellations or special event permits across the cities of Urbana, Champaign, and the university. Sorry, my throat's getting dry. But what has happened, of course, if you've been paying attention, is that those things were released. So we now have a suspension of special event permits through Labor Day. And that means that all Downtown Get Down events have had to be canceled. So we do not have any plans for any in-person Downtown Get Down events. The planning committee itself is not per se investigating making Downtown Get Down some sort of virtual initiative on its own right now. We're more so thinking towards continuing our partnerships in general to help support the spirit of Urbana's Downtown Get Down, which of course is to promote our downtown, to promote our arts community. So we'll be working towards that. And then we, in and among each other, have a number of other projects we're working on. So for instance, 40 North and the Urbana Urbana Arts and Culture are currently working with Spurlock on a summer series that might be released soon. We're working with the library on a number of initiatives such as Young Artist Studio and the other ones that I mentioned. We're working with Urbana Business Association. So there's quite a lot of different things that we're going to be continuing. But it might be taking sort of different forms. All of our art at the market things are canceled for the moment. Our farmers market, however, continues. So we encourage everyone to go out to the farmers market. We are not, for the present moment, talking about any concerts or things like that, because the real intention here is to keep this as an in and out market. Again, I mentioned the murals on glass, poems on glass, all of these things are underway. We're working towards getting them up, and you'll be the first to know as soon as those things are. And then I really wanted to spend some time on talking about COVID relief resources. I will say that at the time of this report, many of the deadlines had not been passed, but unfortunately now many of them are. But I will go over them briefly here, just so you're aware of some of the things that we've been sending out to artists. So first and foremost, the Illinois Arts Council Agency. I attended a webinar, and I think the takeaway here when you think about relief funds is that both the National Endowment of the Arts and the National Endowment of the Humanities through the CARES Act funding had about, I think it was roughly 60% of funds that were going to be given out directly through those federal agencies, and then 40% that were going to be given out from the local versions of those agencies, the state versions. So in that case, Illinois Arts Council relief funds are the localized portion of that funding. Only $3,000 was available per organization, and the deadline has passed. It was May 15th. I am aware that we had a number of local people and organizations apply to this, and certainly I promoted it to a lot of different organizations. Similarly, we also had artistrelief.org. Now, this was a consortium of organizations that came together. There's been 2 cycles of this, and this is a consortium of private funding that was being distributed as relief monies. I am aware of at least 3 artists now that have told me they received this funding, and it was incredibly competitive. So I was really excited to know that at least some of our local artists have seen some response from this. Americans for the Arts are maintaining a wonderful COVID-19 relief guide. So I do want to encourage you, as you're communicating with any artists or cultural workers that you work with, to be aware of this link, because it's a wonderful resource. And the website also breaks things down by kind of area, national versus state versus local, and then you can also indicate kind of what creative sector you're in, and it will give you an indication of what you qualify for. So it's very, very useful. National Endowment for the Humanities is really something that, you know, is particularly of interest to those who do cultural work, archival work, folks who are doing things that really connect more deeply with education in the humanities. So again, very similar to the NEA, and I'll have to say, like, you'll notice that the National Endowment of the Arts isn't even on this list, and that's because theirs closed already before this report had even been written. But National Endowment of the Arts, again, 2 has passed. The deadline was May 11th, and they were also giving out, you know, relief up to $300,000 to cultural nonprofits. The National Endowment of the Arts was up to $50,000 per application. And again, the local versions of those are much smaller amount. So Arts for Illinois is another one, again, passed in terms of the deadline now, particularly working to prioritize artists of color and organizations that particularly work for the needs and interests of people of color, which and also particularly kind of focused on Chicago and Cook County, although it accepted applications from beyond Chicago and Cook County. Again, I haven't heard a lot of direct things from people who applied for this one yet. I'm not getting a significant amount of feedback from our artists who have applied, many of whom just haven't heard back and are sort of waiting. But I have heard the occasional, you know, good news. So I think, you know, what we're doing is we're just continuing to share as much as we can about these relief funds that are popping up. And that's a really big part of how we're redirecting our work here as well, is we want all these artists to exist and to have their livelihoods exist well beyond this crisis. We want these arts organizations to outlive this crisis. So that's where we want to put our attention right now. So that's largely the report for May, but I do want to also, so I'm going to actually stop screen sharing Because the other thing I do want to do before we get to our grant presentations, and we can also, you know, decide to maybe give Deborah the opportunity to present first before we circle back to this. But what I wanted to do today is to really take some time to get your input and feedback on how we're thinking about Tier 3 grants. Because what we're faced with right now is that, you know, the smaller grants, sometimes it's a little bit easier for them to decide if something can be virtual or, you know, if something can be held at a later date. But for our Tier 3 grants, these are huge festivals. They're usually planned with significant advancement, and they also are very impacted by the same constraints that the Downtown Get Down is impacted by. And right now we know that extends through Labor Day, but the truth of the matter is, more important than dates right now is the reality that we are needing from a public health perspective and from the governor's five-phase reopening plan. We need to be in phase 5 for large events and gatherings to be able to take place. And we don't, that includes having either a vaccine, or it includes having significant treatment if we don't have a vaccine, and the capability of widespread treatment. That's the language. And so we can anticipate that this extension may go beyond Labor Day. And so I think what we're faced with is deciding, because this is a substantial amount of money in these categories, the average, you know, being around $10,000 per applicant, let's, and that's not the average, but they go up to $10,000. It's really important, I think, for us to be very good stewards of that money, and really good stewards not only to those who receive it, but to also its original intention, which is to create festival and gathering in our downtown. So I think that might be a discussion point that we want to come back to. One of the other points in the agenda is talking about the impact of COVID-19. Certainly that is part of that discussion. So if maybe for the sake of time today, I'm going to suggest that we talk first with Deborah and have her give her grant presentation, and I can include that when we talk more about the COVID-19 impact later in the agenda. Does that work for everyone?
Yes.
We'll give you some time to percolate on it too, if you haven't been already. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Okay.
That's the end of the staff report, unless anyone has any questions or comments.
Okay, I guess we can go ahead then with the grant presentation, which will be from Deborah Larson of Urbana Pops Orchestra, presenting on the 2019 Urbana Arts Grant, Urbana Pops Orchestra.
Okay, thanks all for having me. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here with you. Okay, everybody see it? We've been at this for 10 years now. We started in 2010. And I can honestly say that without your consistent support, I'm not sure we'd be here. It's been, we are truly grateful for the grants we've received from Urbana City. A little bit about Urbana Pops Orchestra. For any orchestra, the main goal, I think, is to play music well and to be entertaining, have entertaining performances. But Urbana Pops Orchestra also has three kind of additional goals. The first one is to be accessible. And by that we mean that we perform shorter works, like not the full symphony, but maybe one movement. We also perform music from stage musicals, from film that people might be familiar with. And then we also are accessible in that we perform in casual performance spaces like the library lobby and the Urbana High School auditorium. We also are educational, and one of the main components of that is that we make sure that 20 to 30% of our performances are made up of student musicians who play alongside of professionals. They share stands with them, they learn from them, they model them, or they learn through mentoring. And then the third goal is that we make it affordable so that low-income families, so that anybody can, people that have numerous children that wouldn't be able to maybe afford a concert where they're paying a high ticket price per seat, can come to our concerts and our performances. So Again, this year, thanks to you, all of our performances were absolutely free, and that's something we're really proud of. We gave 4 free recitals, all in the Urbana Free Library. If you look at the upper left of your screen, that first one is Tamara Gingold, and she brings a lot of her Urbana students with her of all ages, all the way up to high school. But you can see her in the front of that picture. She's kneeling. She plays right along with her younger students. To the right hand side of your screen is our principal trombone player, Peter Tijergina, and he brought a jazz ensemble and a vocalist, which was a really unique performance. Bottom left, that was our September recital, and we had a last minute cancellation. And so Stephen Larson, who is our principal conductor, but also is a pianist, filled in on the spur of the moment, played some Gershwin, and also we wrangled a couple of local high school students, and they were able to sing some music from musicals. So that was really entertaining. And then bottom right is our principal trumpet player, Barky Bryant. And he's a real live wire. He was just terrific. He was very entertaining and fun and educational. He's holding up, in that picture, he's holding up 2 different kinds of trumpets and describing the difference to the audience. And he brought with him all the students from his personal studio, and they all performed in ensembles and solos. It was really wonderful. We also had 2 requests for small ensembles this year. The Sigma Alpha Iota, the music for sorority on campus, put together a new event, and they asked Urbana Pops Orchestra to perform, and it was to benefit several local charities. And then the right side is Urbana's Pops Orchestra, student and adult musicians performing at the farmers market. They were playing spooky strings music. We also provided the pit orchestra for the Urbana Park District production of Into the Woods. That's out at Parkland. That's the only performance that was outside of Urbana this year. And that included 9 adult musicians and 1 student musician. That's Max Ando over on the trumpet in the back on the right with our kind of red-brown hair. And if you're not familiar with performing in a musical pit, it's a very thankless job, but I think if things go awry in the pit, it's more noticeable probably than something on stage. It's really important, even at a student production, to have a really strong pit orchestra supporting those students. So they did a fantastic job. And of course, the highlight of our year is always our full orchestra performance. And this year it was again at Urbana High School. Because it was our 10th year, we called it Plays Well with Others. That is our motto, but it's also, it was also very true for this concert, because this concert was 100% collaborative. A local group called Transit Brass came. You can see them standing in the front row of that picture. They performed music with the orchestra, like we started with Fanfare for the Common Man by Aaron Copland. And so that showcases the brass. But then Transit Brass also performed a set of their own. And then the Park District, we always provide a preview of the Park District musical. And so the cast from Into the Woods came and performed along with the orchestra a couple of excerpts. But then a new collaboration was with the Shambana Competition Concerto winners. This is a new organization. I believe this was their first year ever, and we agreed to play the first, second, and third place winning concertos. So these are pictures taken at the practice that same week. On the left is Urbana High School freshman Jacob Hankin. In the middle is Urbana High School junior Sam Larson, and then on the right is a 10-year-old homeschooled student from Champaign named DJ Wang, and I'm going to play just an excerpt from his Mozart Concerto number 23 in A major. Thank you. I wanted to get that right. This was just a phenomenal experience for all of us. If you're not familiar with how concertos work, for the audition, they performed the piece on piano, and then a second pianist, a lot of times it's their teacher or sometimes another paid musician, sits next to them at a second piano and plays kind of a reduced version of what the orchestra would play, so that the soloist knows when to come in. But it doesn't sound like a regular concerto because the strings aren't there, the symphony isn't there. So this is a really unique experience for those students to be able to play their piece with a full orchestra. Before I go to the end, I just wanted to stress again how important this educational component is to us. It's thrilling to me. I get to go to the rehearsals and take photos, and I always see tremendous opportunities happening all around the room of these professionals working one-on-one with the students sitting next to them, sometimes turning around and talking to the other students in their section. I watch the students looking at those professionals to make sure that they're bowing correctly and asking them questions. And I see a lot of joy going on in the practices. I see a lot of smiling faces. It just looks like they're having a blast themselves. So that's always very entertaining and very encouraging for me. So thank you again for giving me this opportunity. I want to go ahead and try my best at sharing just that short video from DJ Wang. Let's see if I can get this to go. Oh,
The only thing to be mindful of, and you might have already tested this, Deborah, was having your sound turned on when you share screen.
Yeah, Jason and I tried it and I think it should work.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, this is just about 3 minutes. This is the end of DJ Wang's performance. It's a very emotional piece, and I thought you'd enjoy seeing a little bit about it. And just kind of interesting is that 3 weeks after he performed this on the Urbana High School stage, he and his father flew to Russia, and he performed this exact same concerto with the Kostroma Symphony Orchestra, which I'm guessing charged a ticket price. So here we go. Hope you like that.
Okay, yes, thank you, Deborah. Does anybody on the commission have any questions or comments they want to make? Okay, well, it's a great program, Deborah. Thanks very much for
Sorry, I
sharing.
had my hand up. I was just wanting to say, it's been, even in the last 3 years of us funding Urbana Pops Orchestra, and I know that we funded it probably before my time, but those are my years of being in this job. It's really unique what you're able to provide to the community, and I love the spin that you guys do on traditional, string work, and it's just really lovely to see. So thank you for continuing forward. And I'm going to be excited to be in touch with you as things progress with this climate right now and figuring out ways that we can still bring this work to students, because it's so important to further these things along. Are there ways that you guys are still working together right now?
Yeah, obviously we waited until the last possible time to cancel our summer concert, but it would have been 3 weeks from now. So we're going to be making a public announcement soon, but we had thought we have a really fabulous program scheduled. I'm very visual program because we have a fairly long piece, probably about 13 to 15 minutes of a video fly through of the Urbana High School building as it looked in 1913. It's incredible, and it has original music to it. So that's going to be a really special program, and we were really looking forward to it. But we felt like even if we went ahead and did it and provided social distancing in the audience, we couldn't do that for the orchestra members on stage. They would have to be close together, and horn players can't wear a mask, and it was just it was impossible to do. So we were really disappointed. But we are putting together some virtual performances. We're looking at whether they might be like what you've seen where everybody records it separately and then it's combined, or if it's going to be a smaller, like a quintet, we might be able to take it to a location and record it there with everybody wearing masks, assuming it's all strings players and not brass. So we're looking at some options that we'll be releasing throughout the summer. We want to keep performing music. Obviously, artists today are really struggling, and we want to keep that in the forefront, that music is important.
It is, and no matter what you end up doing, if there's ways that we can help promote it, tell the story, or share it out with people through our platforms, please be in touch.
Thank you.
We'd love to support what you're working on.
Thank you. That'd be great.
Okay, since we're done with the presentation, let's go ahead and have a discussion of the impact of COVID-19 on the arts and culture program.
Excellent. And Deborah, feel free if you need to leave, you don't need to stick around, but I'd love to invite us all to give her a round of applause, because we've normally been doing that. And it's hard to do in Zoom. Thank you so much for your work. All right, everyone. So we're going to turn our attention to talking a little bit more about the Tier 3 grants. So just to kind of ground the discussion, as you know, and I'll just reiterate it, we have currently a suspension of special event permits, and that goes through Labor Day, September 7th. So, and that's what we know so far. I have also put out a survey to all of our Tier 3 grantees. I have not heard back from the majority. I have heard from 2 of them to kind of give me a sense of how they're thinking about it right now. The questions I asked them, and I don't have them right in front of me to recall perfectly, but the questions I asked them by and large were, what are you facing with how you're thinking about planning your program right now? What steps, if any, have you taken to possibly adapt or change or do anything differently than had been planned with your program? As we are considering the best way forward for these grants, what do you want to make staff and the commission aware of in terms of what your most primary needs are related to this grant project? If you have needs that are greater than that, connected to your organization in general. So for instance, if this isn't your biggest fish to fry and you want to tell us like, hey, this is actually the real big deal that we're going through right now related to this pandemic, tell us that. So it really invited us to kind of get a temperature check with them. Unfortunately, because I haven't heard back from all of them, I don't have a lot of information to share. I had been under the assumption, and it turned out to be a false assumption, that per my last conversations with Pygmalion, for instance, that I hadn't been under the impression that they would explore a virtual event, but because we had talked about doing a joint event, were we to continue to partner potentially during Pygmalion if we weren't going to have to suspend large gatherings and suspend the downtown get down. When we had postponed May, we talked about adding September. That would have been the same fourth Saturday that falls on Pygmalion. So we had been, as a committee, in touch with Pygmalion's planning team to talk about, like, how could we do this together, you know, almost kind of like what we'd been doing with Sweet Corn in the August date, and really just make it a, you know, bigger and better than ever, you know, event. And they were really game up for that. But, you know, the things have changed, and it's really hard to plan anything in person when we know that we're at least not going to be able to obtain special events through the beginning of September, and this would be 2 to 3 weeks later. So my understanding now is that they're trying to explore a virtual option. They're one of the people who have gotten back to me. The CU Folk and Roots team are wanting to let the whole team weigh in, so they're taking some time with getting back to this survey. So I have not heard back from them, and I haven't heard back from the other two. I've heard back from, I should say, Urbana Business Association, though not formally to that survey, but we'd already been in touch because I'm on the board. And I know that they are, you know, they've made the announcement that it is canceled and they are exploring virtual options. And I know that in the case of Darius and Abby, that they've spent some significant time doing research into how others are doing virtual events, you know, and really looking at examples of things like state fairs who've gone virtual and what their lineup looks like, how they organize it, using things like Zoom. Of course, their primary concern is that these are usually income generating events and not events that, and already sometimes are on the cusp of not being income generating events on a normal year, because, you know, festivals have been difficult to sustain in you know, as the years go on in terms of their profitability. So that too is a big factor, is, you know, it's not simply can this be turned into a virtual event, but is there anything that generates revenue through the event when that happens? So these are kind of the questions that are being faced. And then from our standpoint, what we do typically with these grants is that it is very understood and communicated in grant orientation that we understand that projects don't go according to plan. That's very common on a normal year, not a pandemic. You know, it's just very common that life happens and things don't go exactly according to plan. The dates change, the venue changes, the people involved change, you know, the way they're spending their budget may need to change. What we typically do is we communicate upfront that we understand that that is likely to be something that could be faced, and that at that time, before any decisions are made, they need to communicate what's going on, and they also need to submit a revised plan and a revised budget for approval if things are changing in the budget. And that sometimes happens regardless, because as many of you know, people often get funded at less than the 100% of what they asked for. So they are already kind of making those decisions about, you know, how are they reapplying the money in ways that are going to benefit them most, and make sure that the project goes on. So with staff approval, which is largely my approval, and I, you know, evaluate using my very best judgment what is reasonable, they are able to make changes to their project. They're able to, in theory, do a virtual event or something like that. The reason why I know that we want to ask your feedback specifically about tier 3 is because it's so much more money than the other tiers. And because the real impact, like the real idea behind tier 3 is also festival and large scale special event, which usually means gathering and also means promotion of our downtown venues and businesses. And so when we hold things virtually, you know, I think the question becomes, how do we ask that of those organizations, and how do those venues and businesses still somehow benefit, right? How does it create, you know, additional placemaking and creative placemaking here in Urbana when anyone can access a Zoom event from anywhere, and we're not necessarily gathering together in Urbana? I think there's ways, of course, that we can think creatively around these questions, but we wanted to ask you, what are some of the things that you would want out of somebody who is able to, you know, have their full grant amount, let's say $10,000. Certainly they always have to show that they've spent the money. So even if they do a virtual event, it needs to be spent. And it, you know, if it's not spent in full, then it's not, you know, reimbursed in full. And then if there are changes, they are supposed to ideally be approved. So that's sort of the understood landscape. But because of the amount, what are some of the other questions that you would want to make sure staff are thinking about as we're considering how to guide people right now and how to think about the distribution and the stewardship of what is a significant chunk of the budget? Go ahead, Jared.
Well, I think your initial survey to them was pretty thorough and asking a lot of smart and important questions about how they see what they're doing going forward. I mean, I have a hard time reconciling myself with the fact that the landscape of live events may have changed for forever as far as we know, but certainly for the foreseeable future. In my world, I have a lot of folks who have been long-time clients of ours at our production company who are considering that this, because their budgets were so shoestring to begin with, that the loss of the event in 1 year is kind of a killer for them. And that unless something big changes, you may not be able to afford to do it again because you needed what you were going to get out of, this particular year to move on to the next one, and holding off for a year just really isn't an option for some folks. So, my primary concern is longevity for our folks. And I would be asking, in addition to the things that you've asked about, what are your prospects for 2020, is what would it be able to do for you if you were able to apply these funds in addition to asking for funds next year, because they've already been awarded and we, have already decided that we were going to spend the money before all of this happens. What would it be able to do for you in your long-term prospect of returning in 2021 if, we are able to in some form or fashion? Because, outside of, it's so hard to even think about accomplishing anything in the form that most of these folks do what they do. I watched a couple of live streams from the Detroit Movement Festival over the weekend. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that festival, but it's a largely electronic festival, mostly based with DJs. So it's a little easier for them to put that together because it doesn't involve full bands and, it's easier to stream. But, there's probably, I think, what do they have? 150,000 people over the 3 days that generally attend that event in person live. And, there were maybe 3,000 people on a channel at any given time watching a particular artist streaming. And even if all of those people paid, you didn't even pay. Like the streams were free. They put up links to donate, but you didn't have to. So you think about that and, the idea that that's like less than 1/100% of their normal attendees. Most of those people who, travel and come there and spend money on hotels. And then, they had to have had DJs who were just like, yeah, we'll just do this for nothing, basically to support, people being aware of it and not forgetting about your festival and elongating it. So, even I'm just using this as a point to illustrate that even under the most critical of thinking of circumstances of, what is the best use of $10,000 in 2020 in the reality of, what prospect do they have to really promote and reach an audience and get out there? If streaming is, their only option, then it's, you're putting them in a position where there may not be really a good answer to that question. And my immediate sense is to think of longevity and to think of what does it do for you both this year and what could it do for you next year in needing to probably deal with some issues you wouldn't even have had before, such as, investing in hand washing stations, investing in antibacterial things and disinfectants, because a lot of those things could still be in play when people do stuff next year. So, and those were my thoughts when I saw that, was just thinking further down the line because I would support certainly use of funds in this year for next year and rolling those through to ensure longevity. So that's my thought.
Yeah, that's great. And that, you know, we've tossed around internally here at the staff like a whole lot of ideas of like what could happen with those funds, and you know, thinking about, first of all, you know, yeah, the dream of what can happen, and then, you know, of course, working out like what is truly possible within our financial constraints and things at the city too. But rolling over funds into a next year. So in other words, like if someone decides I can't put on my festival, I do not want to do a virtual event, it's not going to be viable for us, I don't necessarily want to return the money, but I'd love to request that they be rolled over into next year. And that they would also then be eligible, in your mind, Jared, to also apply for additional funding at that time. Other ideas from folks, or things that are just on your mind that you'd be like, oh, I really want us to consider this about that? Go ahead, Barbara.
Since some of those festivals are so dependent on bringing in artists from out of town, I imagine you've addressed how they, since they're not using funds to bring artists into town, they would certainly be paying their performance fees, but the money that they would have budgeted for travel and housing expenses would not necessarily be needed now. So how would they justify using those funds, or what would they do to replace that activity that would still be beneficial to the community?
Yeah, what we see more often with these grants is less of external people coming to Urbana being funded, to be honest, and more of a priority of those who are using local artists already and paying local artists. But to Jared's point, I think the people that are going to be suffering the most in the climate of not being able to gather are production companies, people who do staging, people who do like all the sound and all, you know, all of the production, anybody who rents out tents or things like that, you know, those things are really not happening. And then the bands, you know, to Jared's point as well, is like there is, you know, if we're sheltering and if we're actually staying distant from each other, there are bands who haven't practiced together or played together now for a few, you know, for months, and won't be for the foreseeable future. And there will be, you know, some benefit given to bands who happen to also be roommates, or, you know, bands who are very small. DJs are in an advantage. Again, just to your point, Jared, is like a lot of DJs can actually continue work. Many own their own decks, many are home and like able to kind of set up a streaming for that. And, you know, we've seen that too. We've been sharing information out about that. But with bands, I think it's a lot trickier, and we are entering into an area of the phasing where, you know, it has been said that you can gather in smaller groups and still try to maintain distance. So it might be possible for bands to play together, you know, with some space between them or something going forward. But yeah, I think these are all like considerations that are sort of part of that landscape, and thinking both about equity and about like just good stewardship of the money, you know, as well. I also was, on my mind was the idea that, you know, here's the landscape of even relief funding. Like if this funding is thought about as relief funding in some respect, you know, is every federal and state agency is asking for an application and some level of justification over, you know, what that money will be used for and why them over someone else, you know. And that would be another thought on my part, was thinking about, well, let's say somebody says we can't put on an event and we don't know what, and let's say we couldn't roll it over to next year. We might be able to, but like, let's say we couldn't. Rather than return the money, maybe if they returned it, it could go into a fund. You know, like one thought I had was like, maybe that would, like they'd have the option of returning it towards a relief fund that they then could apply to, or anyone could apply to if they needed it, right? And so that would also, when we're thinking about it being like, you know, converted in some way to something else, I think the question on my mind is also like, of course, all 4 of these organizations are deserving, but there are also like so many other organizations that are also deserving if it gets thought of as like relief money. And I also don't know if that would even be approved of, like internal to the city here. So I think we also have to think about, you know, what I want to gather is, what is your perspective here? What would you want us to be able to consider to do? or even things that you just want us to be mindful of, and then try to take all of that information coupled with their survey information and come up with something that seems to work best for everybody. But it's definitely tough to come up with what exactly is the right thing to do.
Salo, I see you speaking, but you probably need to unmute yourself.
Oh.
So yeah, I was saying that I don't know how possible is to provide funding for more applicants, at least for this time, because if they are going to do the events virtually, so maybe more people can have the opportunity. This is one of the possibilities I was thinking of, and the other is because some of the events are just for a weekend or so. Having the events just have them the programming to be more than a weekend, so a month or something like that. Yeah, it's because in that way probably more audience, more possibility for including more artists, performers. So probably that's also something I was considering. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know, thinking about these things as potentially turning them into series is something that they could do now, actually, within the constraints of the current process. You know, they can give me a revised proposal and say, hey, this normally is like a 2-day event, but we're going to do this over a period of 3 months. And every Thursday there's a live concert, and it's still branded under our brand. And that, you know, in theory right now, they should be able to do that and then ask for approval before moving forward on it. Mm-hmm. Barbara?
Do they have any guarantees from the vendors who are hosting their events? 'Cause I know working with the area orchestras, people are planning dates to try to perform concerts again, knowing that we hope the audiences will be hungry for live music and want to come back. But the venues, for example, the Krannert Center, we're at the mercy of the Krannert Center when the university decides that it's going to be safe to bring people back into campus. So how do these recipients, how do they know that they will have a guarantee, and what are the venues going to do to honor those concerns as well?
Right, and those venues are constrained, of course, themselves by what the current guidance is. The other thing that had been brought up on our side on the staff side was, you know, because the spirit of this is collaboration with and promotion also of our businesses, that is part, you know, the economic impact part is very important, more largely, you know, not just to the organization, but to the city of Urbana itself, is thinking about, you know, are there things that we could ask of those organizations that still work to promote our downtown venues? You know, like maybe there's something that they have to do. If there's some sort of an electronic version of the event, maybe they're still somehow collaborating to promote those venues that they were going to be working with previously in some way. Yeah. Any other ideas? Oh, go ahead, Jared.
Is to ask about what ideas they may have about the scope of possibility for events in phase 4 where 50 folks are allowed. Because I've seen the idea floated in a couple of circles of basically like 15 to 20 minute sets, and people kind of just buy tickets to sets rather than a night of performance, and rotate in and rotate out based on true interest in the event, I guess. So if you wanted to have a band perform for an hour at the Rose Bowl and you offer 50 tickets for 20-minute sets, and if you really want to buy the tickets for each one of the sets and they're going to do 4 sets that night, then you buy tickets for all of them. Or a promoter could restrict and only not allow duplication or only allow duplication twice. Or I've seen it floated in a couple different circles from people about how to best utilize and profit off of a 50-person capacity in a venue, which realistically, you know, with between that and trying to like sell drinks and do everything venues have to do, isn't the great, you know, it's not going to make it the way it was, but you know, some folks are at least exploring it. So I'd be interested to hear if people hadn't even considered or have any ideas about how to get creative with a 50-person capacity, assuming we won't see phase 5 in Illinois this year at all.
Yeah. Well, and of course, hoping that we don't have some sort of second wave or something that makes us backslide and go backwards versus forwards. Right. I think that like there's so many things that we have to sort of plan contingencies for. But I appreciate that as well. Is like thinking about that 50-person capacity. It seems like creatively there's ways to get around that. I do, of course, lament that we live in Illinois, even though I love it, because it's like this is the time when we can be outdoors and a little bit more socially distant and participate in something versus, you know, a few months from now when phase 4 might be more likely to happen. It still doesn't allow for that, that more simplified thing of more expansive space. I think one of our challenges, which was a challenge before COVID-19, is we don't have very many large venues at all, like really none, you know, like 1 or 2. So it really leaves us kind of beholden to the constraints of even the space that we have. Yeah. And of course we want them to be in Urbana, and they're funded, you know, to be in our TIF district, which also means largely our downtown. So that whole aspect too of like us being good stewards of the fact that, you know, it is really designated for the TIF district needs to be, you know, really built into whatever we do to move forward. How is a virtual event truly within our TIF district? And like really that's, I think, a challenge too, is like tying it back somehow there to our businesses. Is there anything, I know that we could probably sit here with, you know, staring at each other in deep in thought for a while, but I'm wondering, is there anything that's coming up right now? And maybe the invitation from me could just be, let's not end this conversation. Like, think about this with me if you can. I'll send a follow-up email to all the commissioners again with maybe some questions to, and if you know, can take the time either to respond there or, you know, send me any thoughts you have. That will really help me make sure that what we go forward on is something that also all of you would be comfortable with and all of you would get behind. And I, of course, want to include Janelle, who I think wasn't able to stay on this call, and also, you know, Frank and Angela. So I'll be sure to get it out to everybody. But I guess before we move on, any other thoughts or concerns that you just want to air? Okay. Well, I really appreciate you thinking this through with me. I will, we'll both have this, of course, reflected in the minutes, but we will also, I'll send out a follow-up email about the question, and I'll be sure as I receive feedback, what I'm going to do is compile it and then send it out so that you can see directly what that feedback's looking like from the Tier 3 grantees that were funded this year, and I'll send them out a reminder to get back to me too. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's it. I don't see any new business on the agenda, so I think we are adjourned at this point.